我侄子的哭声和我妈的呐喊，就是喊救命的那个声音。当时我清清楚楚地看到了我的炸掉的那个小腿，就在我倒下的那个旁边，还有身边的人一直在打电话求救。那几个月里，天天就是睡不了觉，因为一睡觉就是有声音，耳边有声音，一清醒，就像个做噩梦一样。
9月份出事了，12月份我们头发全部白了。
无缘无故的把我弄成了这样，挺恨他们的。
我到这里买个可以去买吗？
你敢于面对他吗？
Sağlığı yüz gelenmayım. Kechirim so'rayman. Ammo o'xshash shu asabiyga uchrab shu xatoliklarni sodir qilgan, o'xshash xato o'tkazganlarning sababidan qo'zg'alib bir butun mangulik ayrildi. O'rnini to'liqlab bergil bo'lmaydi, lekin yana samimiylik bilan kechirim so'rayman.
他们是被那种暴恐的、恐怖的那种视频啊，被洗脑了。我觉得也是，他们也是一个受害者，对我的生活影响也很大嘛。我也不想一直那样走下去，因为路还很长。我觉得我已经走出来了。去那边逛街的时候也没有那种不太舒服的事情。多半是父母的陪伴、家人的陪伴，还有身边朋友的鼓励。
For many survivors like Diliquimer, there are permanent reminders that life can never be the same.
能够习惯这个假肢吗？现在
已经习惯了，可是已经没有当年那种跳舞，不能跳舞了。
这个也是很大的遗憾。
对，很大的遗憾。虽然现在成了一个3级人，可是我觉得我还是挺幸运的，因为路还很长，父母都在身边，我还有自己喜欢的工作。
你觉得活着是最重要的？
对，活着最重要的，大难不死，感觉自己特别幸运，特别的幸福。我学的是康复专业，我也希望所学的专业能帮助到更多像我这样所需要的人。维语里面的意思就是迪利，就是心灵的意思，心理。坎马尔就是维语古代里面就是月亮的称呼，就是加起来就是心目中的月亮的意思。
Diliquimer puts on a brave face every day. She goes to work and lives with her parents and nephews. She wants to get a driver's license and buy a car. Her biggest dream is to buy a bigger house for the whole family. All survivors have their own story. And each story is the same.
Hello, and welcome back to the history of the Uyghurs. In the last video, we discussed how the Uyghurs, who were Buddhist and Manichaean nomads in Mongolia, ended up as Sunni Muslims in the Terran Basin. We ended with the beginning of the rule of the Chagatai Khanate in the region. However, before we pick back up, I want to backtrack a bit and discuss the importance of the Kara Khanids, who we only briefly mentioned in the last video. The Kara Khanid Khanate was a Sunni Islamic state in Central Asia founded by the Karluks, whom you may recall as one of the Uyghurs' allies in their fight against the Gwekturks. When absorbed into the Mongol Empire, the Kara Khanids had a massive role in shaping the identity of the Chagatai Khanate, and therefore today's Uyghurs. The dominance of Sunni Islam is the most obvious connection. The modern Uyghur language descends from Chagatai, which itself comes from Karluk, which was spoken by the Kara Khanids. But, as we also mentioned in the last video, this intermixing of cultures led to the disappearance of the name Uyghur from contemporary histories for quite some time. We do know that when the Chagatai Khanate split in the mid-14th century, the Uyghurs remained with the Mongol-ruled eastern portion known as Mogulistan. In the 16th century, the Uyghurs became part of the Yarkand Khanate, destroyed by the Dzungars in 1705. The Dzungars were Tibetan Buddhist Mongols from western Mongolia. After 1717, they even controlled Tibet. The Uyghurs were enslaved by the Dzungars and treated very cruelly. So it was no surprise that the Uyghurs often helped the Chinese Qing dynasty in its efforts to conquer the Dzungars. The Dzungar Khanate fell in 1755. For the next 3 years, the Chinese government committed the Dzungar Genocide, killing more than 500,000 Dzungars. This was roughly 80% of the Dzungar population, and they never recovered. Following the genocide, the Uyghurs became by far the dominant ethnic group in Xinjiang, especially the Terrorism Basin. The Qing dynasty allowed the existence of the Kumul Khanate, a semi-autonomous region for Uyghurs. Xinjiang province had not yet gained that name. The north of Xinjiang was called the Dzungar region or Dzungaria, while the Terrorism Basin came to be known as the Muslim frontier. The Uyghurs themselves continued to be called Turks, Turkey, Mussulman, Chanto, meaning turban head, Taranchi, meaning farmer, and pretty much anything except Uyghur. Arguably, a modern Uyghur identity had not even been formed yet. They were sometimes lumped in with the Hui, the other major Muslim group within China, though they are now considered separate. The Hui were the main force behind the First Dungan Revolt, which ravaged western China in the 1860s and 70s. The Qing dynasty nearly lost control of Xinjiang to the revolt. Yaqub Beg, an adventurer of Uzbek or Tajik descent, established himself as the leader of the revolt and proclaimed himself Emir of Kashgar. Both Britain and Russia, who were competing for influence in Central Asia at this time, recognized the Emirate of Kashgar. However, it seems religion was not enough to unify the various peoples populating Xinjiang. It is not clear what sort of role the Uyghurs played in the Dungan Revolt, but they were not the most active supporters of the Emirate. In 1877, the Qing dynasty defeated Yaqub Beg and soon drove out the Russians, who had occupied the north of Xinjiang. In 1884, the region was made into a province and officially given the name of Xinjiang, which means New Frontier. This name is considered insulting by many modern-day Uyghur nationalists who prefer the terms East Turkestan or Uyghurstan. In 1912, the Qing dynasty was overthrown by the Xinhai Revolution, and China soon plunged into the chaos of the warlord era. Xinjiang came under the control of the Xinjiang clique. As both Mongolia and Tibet broke away from China in the midst of this chaos, the Uyghurs, now starting to form a distinct modern identity, sought independence as well. During a 1921 Soviet-sponsored conference held in Tashkent, the non-nomadic Turkic Muslims of Xinjiang were renamed the Uyghurs. They traced their ancestry back to the old Uyghur Khaganate and, while acknowledging the differences between themselves and the old Uyghurs, took their name. The Soviet Union took advantage of Uyghur nationalism to push their own interests in Xinjiang. In 1930, China abolished the Kumul Khanate, sparking a major Uyghur rebellion, and the Soviets quickly intervened. There were 3 major players in the war, which lasted until 1934. The Uyghurs, who sought independence, the Soviet Union and the Xinjiang clique, who were allies, and the Chinese nationalist government, who wanted to secure stronger control over Xinjiang. In 1933, the Uyghurs established the Islamic Republic of East Turkestan with the capital at Kashgar. This became the first Uyghur attempt at independence. Despite being an Islamic republic, East Turkestan ensured religious freedom. It also nationalized major industries and all underground resources. In 1934, East Turkestan was destroyed by the other 2 parties. The Soviets emerged victorious, securing a satellite in the Xinjiang clique under the leadership of Chiang Kai. The Chinese, hoping to regain control of Xinjiang, were quick to use the Uyghurs as their political pawns. In 1937, the Chinese government supported the Uyghur uprising against Soviet-controlled Xinjiang. However, the rebellion was unsuccessful and only resulted in the strengthening of Soviet power in the province. In 1941, Chiang Kai betrayed the Soviets and pledged loyalty to China. This time, the Soviets used the Uyghurs as pawns to regain Xinjiang. In 1944, the Soviets sponsored the Ili Rebellion, during which the Uyghurs were able to establish the Republic of East Turkestan. The republic was based in Dzungaria and was a Soviet satellite. The Chinese nationalists tried to regain this territory, but a ceasefire in 1946 seemingly secured the republic's continued existence. By 1949, though, it was clear that the communists were going to defeat the nationalists in the Chinese Civil War. This meant that, from the perspective of the Soviets, East Turkestan had outlived its purpose. East Turkestan was absorbed into Communist China by the end of the year. Beijing then encouraged the Han Chinese migration into Xinjiang. In 1953, Xinjiang was 75% Uyghur and 6% Han. By the late 90s, Xinjiang's population was 40% Han Chinese and only 45% Uyghur. Zungaria and the provincial capital of Urumqi have become majority Han, while the Uyghurs still dominate the Tarim Basin. China suppressed and still suppresses Uyghur religion and culture, which has galvanized the separatist movement to continue. The Uyghurs are also at an economic disadvantage compared to the Han Chinese, exacerbating the tension between the two ethnic groups. The tension reached a breaking point in summer of 2009. In late June, Uyghur factory workers in Shaoguan, Guangdong province were falsely accused of sexually assaulting a Han Chinese woman. 2 Uyghurs were killed by Han vigilantes and more than 100 were injured. This led to a peaceful protest in Urumqi on July 5th that quickly turned into a violent confrontation with police. The demonstration soon unraveled into a race riot during which nearly 200 people, mostly Han Chinese, ended up dead.
Intelligence sources say since its founding, the ETIM has made Xinjiang the primary target of its attacks. With the help of Al-Qaeda, the ETIM recruited terrorists and religious extremists in Xinjiang. The recruits were sent to war zones for so-called battlefield practice before returning to China. Sources have also confirmed that the East Turkestan Islamic movement has a policy of using children to achieve its goals, like blowing up model Chinese police cars. On June 6, 2012, the police came to investigate a residential building in Hotan City. Fearing being found, one suspect detonated the explosives inside. A suspect jumped from the 5th floor with a 4-year-old child. Both died. Other suspects set off more explosives to hinder the police rescue operation. Firefighters rescued 53 children from this 80-square-meter room. The oldest was 13, and the youngest only 4. These children were all students of a so-called madrasa. Mamatusan had sent both of his children to this school. They had both physical training and religious studies every day.
Onundalıq bizdək ballarının bədən məşq qıvatqan, mollaq etib, yəbiğirlab, degəndək, andiki maçonlarının da qoral tutvelib, kendi tuğan sürətlərgən tuğan, sürət ma chatnan filmigən tuğ, ma bizim Uyghur cəməskən tuğ. Uqam bək düşənməyəndə mi vaxt səndə. Lakin o valıqı cihad degen gəpni uqan isimdə.
我们正在研究孩子的时候，这些暴恐分子不顾着这些孩子的生命安全，他们的一点人性都没有，他的思想里面全部是jihad的，为了这个jihad的不顾这个50多个孩子的生命。
Following this crisis, the conflict in Xinjiang quickly escalated. Knife-wielding assailants and suicide bombers have appeared in the name of East Turkestani independence. In 2017, Beijing began to take more extreme measures to control the ongoing conflict. It has increased surveillance in the province and set up so-called vocational education and training centers, in which 10% of all Uyghurs are estimated to be confined. That ends my overview of the history of the Uyghur people, from Mongolia to the Tarim Basin to China.